The next session is a must not miss session, and this will discuss the playbook to lead to the deep tech innovation. The technology ecosystem in India was not only the backbone of the country during this time of crisis, and the startups played an integral role. So this session is going to put a focus on what is the playbook for Indian startups to lead the deep tech innovation, and how is the future in terms of what investment changing and what the new rules of competition are. This session will be chaired by Kunal Bahl, co-founder and CEO of Snapdeal, that today connects millions of buyers with over 5 lakh plus sellers, delivering to 6,000 plus cities and towns all over India. Please welcome on stage Balaji S. Srinivasan, angel investor and entrepreneur, and Kunal Bahl, co-founder and CEO, Snapdeal. Over to you, Kunal and Balaji.
Thank you for having both of us here. It's a pleasure being here at this fantastic event organized by nasscom. Balaji, welcome. Great to be hosting you here, and looking forward to our conversation today. I think many entrepreneurs and technologists have been looking forward to this discussion, going by the Twitter activity that I've been seeing around the lead up to this chat.
Well, Kunal, it's great to meet you, and also great to be here. And this is my kind of intro to India, or return. So I'm really glad to be here, and nasscom's putting on a great show. So yeah,
fantastic. Let's dive in. Obviously your involvement with cryptocurrencies is deep, so I want to get right into it. You've been precipitating a lot of discussion and debate around crypto and India buying Bitcoin. So I think the nation wants to know. But before we get into what the nation wants to know, I read an interesting anecdote that you used to, sometime back, you used to tip the Uber drivers in Bitcoin in the early days. Obviously, I hope they held on to it. They likely are no longer.
Exactly, that's what I was going to say. That's right. Yeah, no, I did do that. That was that's the kind of thing I like to do. Which you're tipping them, but enlightened self-interest is you want to give them something that is more than a tip. And so I said, look, if you install this Coinbase wallet, I give them some Bitcoin. During the ride, I would teach them about Bitcoin. It also helped me explain Bitcoin to people. So, that helped. I could come up with analogies that would work for different parties. And I'd give them some BTC, and I'd say, look, if you think this is good, just tell other passengers about BTC. And I figured that many of them are doing airport trips. They're meeting hundreds of strangers per month. So it's a very high leverage activity.
That's fantastic. Now, on a more serious note, given your close association with crypto, what is your view on how a nation should approach cryptocurrency? Should they embrace them, ignore them, ban them, regulate them? How to harness the good while minimizing the risks of misuse? I know it's hard to always have the best of both worlds or all worlds, but you are one of the people who is most closest to this new world of sorts. So would love to get your thoughts on this.
Great question. So, I wrote a couple of articles that go into a lot of depth on this issue, why India should buy Bitcoin and how India legalizes crypto, the latter of which I just released yesterday or this morning, I don't even remember, and it's on my Twitter. But in short, I think that nations that embrace crypto are going to do far better in the long term than nations that fight it. And India is in a particularly unique position as the number 3 power after a declining US and a rising China. And while the number 1 and number 2 fight, India can take a different path. It can hook its sales to crypto, which is just ascending. There's very few things. You and I have been in technology for a while. There's very few things that are at $1 trillion and growing like crypto is, right? Really, you can only talk about the internet. The internet didn't have a public single number like Bitcoin and the crypto industry does, right, with the coin market caps. So there's very few things that are growing like this. India can hook its sales to crypto and rise, while India is basically a global, neutral, trusted platform balancing against both increasingly combative players and standing for international peace and trade, leading a new non-aligned movement, which is a decentralized movement built around what blockchain-based platforms can do, both centralized and decentralized ones. And the thing is, this is a vision for Indian internationalism. It's not enough just to say India can be great. You need a specific strategy to be number one. If India adopted crypto at a national level, at a strategic level, similar to the way that Estonia, for example, adopted the internet and made it its own, and of course India has done a great job of that with India Stack, but crypto is something that for various reasons, both the US and China cannot or will not do this, but India can. So for example, short, medium, and long-term dividends. Short term is just the obvious aspect of if India actually bought a few $billion of Bitcoin on the day I wrote that essay, or even today, in 5 years, that would be one of the highest ROI movements, or like things that the RBI could do. It'll probably be worth more than their physical gold reserves. I'm happy to make that prediction and calibrate that. In the medium term, what it means is that India can defend its national security. So, the deplatforming that American corporations are doing is not just going to be about speech, it's also going to be about transactions. It's going to be PayPal shutting down things. You saw this headline the other day with Facebook shutting down things in Australia. We're really entering a new era where these global tech companies, especially American tech companies, can just flip a switch, and a few people in California can, deplatform anybody, millions of people, and with essentially no court of appeal or nothing that's worth it. So India certainly needs to build like its own versions of Twitter and Facebook and so on. I think it's capable of doing that, but it's also going to need to speak to the rest of the world and not just Indians. And so the next step after Indian nationalism is Indian internationalism, and going all in on these crypto platforms, decentralized platforms, where you have a demilitarized zone, a zone that cross-border trade is possible without a U.S. corporation being able to shut it down. And then in the long term, I think, again, while these big two players are slugging it out, in the Cold War, the first Cold War, the non-aligned movement was the weakest. But I think in this Cold War, the decentralized movement will be the strongest because there's people who are into crypto on both the U.S. and China side. And how do you actually go about this? Well, here's just a sketch. I'm open to other approaches, but I think the immediate approach would be to work with the folks doing India Stack to build a crypto India Stack, to not just add a digital rupee, that's a great idea, but add a digital rupee that's integrated with the UPI, and also a full crypto wallet that can hold the digital rupee, digital gold, Ethereum, all other cryptocurrencies that India decides to list, and then have that wallet used by Indians at home and abroad to send remittances and earn money for remote work, so other countries cannot cut off the flow of funds back and forth to India at home, to have that wallet used by Indian developers to build apps on this financial internet, to put all stocks on chain in a cryptographically audited stock chain to leapfrog and thereby go from the Indian financial system that we have today to one that's absolutely world class, just like we did with Reliance Jio. We have the cheapest internet service in the world, and attract outside investment through cryptographically audited statements. And finally, to recognize that digital gold is an asset for India, just like gold was an asset for India. Now, I recognize that this is a different direction, but I'm for what it's worth, I was CTO of Coinbase. I've been working in this space for a long time. Every single sentence that I say there, I could write a mini master's thesis or so on if the government wants me to. And so, I stand by. I'm happy to assist. I don't need any compensation or anything like that. I'm willing to help if anybody wants my assistance. I really do think that this is a way that India can help achieve its role on an international stage, because it's a technology that's going to rise, and it's going to be a trillion today and maybe 10 or 100 trillion tomorrow.
That's fantastic. I think I would encourage everyone who is interested in this topic to read the two essays Balaji has written. They're quite interesting and disruptive at the same time in their thinking, and quite fascinating. So, Balaji, you mentioned about the volatility that we are seeing in our lives currently, and obviously we have a remarkable year that we've just put behind us. In some cases, remarkably bad. In some cases, remarkably, innovation driving, which has disrupted every notion of what is normal. But at the same time, it has also been an exceptional year for entrepreneurship. The pandemic has not only sharpened the hustle and hunger amongst founders everywhere in the world, not just in India, but also has catalyzed technical brilliance. The quality of the thinking amongst founders and the ideas have just gone through the roof. And it's almost like the challenges of the pandemic have unlocked the best ideas and the brightest minds everywhere in the world, including India. Now, given you've been closely involved with so many young businesses, particularly in the Silicon Valley over the last many years, what has your experience been in this regard? How have you seen the innovation quotient change in the Valley, which always has stood for a lot of innovation, but have things changed? Have they changed for the better or for the worse, and how?
Well, so a few different things there I could speak to. Let me talk about the pandemic first, and let me go to your second point, how things have changed. So, with the pandemic, I'll give the Silicon Valley or American tech view on it. So, many good startups did just die randomly. It is something where if you had a physical business, it just became hard, and physical business are always hard, and they became basically impossible. You couldn't, if you had anything with people meeting in person, anything with physical facilities, your foot traffic went to zero. Basically, the government just shut you down. There's a classic Thanksgiving Day chart. If you're familiar with that, it's like the weight of a Thanksgiving Day turkey. Their whole life, they're just getting fatter and fatter and fatter, and they think that's just what life is. And then day 1001, ka-chunk, right? It's time for dinner. That's Taleb's famous chart. So some startups, unfortunately, had the Thanksgiving Day turkey chart, and that's just tough. That's just not their fault. And Airbnb almost had that, where they were just they had executed, they thought they were on the glide path, and then suddenly just fell off. And fortunately for them, they were able to get a debt round, they were able to recover, and then that turned out to be a wildly good investment for Silver Lake 6 to 8 months later. But so many good startups died randomly, physical businesses became hard, but others went through the roof, especially like cloud and social networking and productivity apps. And in many ways, a friend of mine has said this, that this was the year the internet began. This is the year that the digital became primary and the physical became secondary. And just to understand what I mean, like, in the 90s, when newspapers first went online, they, there was a website with a few articles, but really the physical paper was the main thing. It had everything, and the website was just a curiosity. Hey, Times of India now online, right? And over time, the website became more and more and more important, and now it's basically something where it's flipped, and the website is the primary, and the physical paper is the secondary for most people, right? And so that flip has now happened with many more sectors with the pandemic, right? Because they've gone to remote work, right? They've gone to Zoom conferences, for example, right? I think we're going to go to VR soon, VR conferences, and then we'll have avatars of both of us, which are, like with 10,000 feet tall or something, with flashing colors. And so now when you go digital first, what's interesting about this, people say, oh, Balaji, well, look, people still like the physical world. We're still physical beings. So when I say absolutely physical is valuable, what that means is physical is now a premium product, right? Everything happens digital first because that's cheap, that's fast. You can just do it on your computer. It's the price of a few key presses, and only the really valuable things get printed out. Not just printed out documents, but printed out meetings. Okay, I'm going to pay $10,000 to bring all these human beings into one place, right? I'm going to, pay money to actually have a physical office as opposed to doing everything remote, right? And we can extend that metaphor of printing even further, where we say, today it's delivery services, like something that's putting a dosa in front of your door where you hit a button, right, and delivers that, right? And there's a human in the loop. There's several humans in the loop, the driver and the restaurant and so on. Tomorrow, that's going to be fully automated, where the supply chain, you'll have a robotic restaurant. It's basically packaged and put into a drone or a sidewalk robot. If you've seen the sidewalk robots, there's these low velocity robots that can't hurt anybody, just move along the sidewalk. If they bump into something, they stop, and then that just makes its way to your home. And then you've got an electromechanical process, which is like a large scale version of printing, no humans involved, right? And so this concept of digital first, physical second is very powerful, because it also taps into, thousands of years of Indian culture, where, we're about, the written word and literature and philosophy. And now you can just hit enter and materialize that. You work it all out in the computer and boom, right? So that's a second angle on it. And the third angle on it, is this was basically like the forced deprecation of the 20th century. All right. Anybody who had not been upgrading their infrastructure, anybody who had not been leaning into technology, all of these 20th century modes got hit. and actually in the US got hit really hard. Essentially, the 20th century leisure economy, which was not something I'd really identified as a class, but kind of the late 20th century America, which has all of these creature comforts, right? Bars, restaurants, concerts, all that type of stuff. All that type of stuff just got force deprecated. You just couldn't do those things. And you can kind of do them, but restaurants have to basically clean themselves up like a biohazard facility because the commons are a tragedy in the U.S. And so, some poor Joe's Diner, because the state has failed, they have to like wipe their surfaces in some cloth because no one can coordinate, right? And so what's happened is the forced deprecation of the 20th century, and I think that the recovery is going to be a Y-shaped recovery, right? We take a different path on the road. And in particular, that path has much more investment in biomedicine and less in the 20th century consumer leisure economy, because everybody thought a lot about their mortality, the mortality of their loved ones, of their elders, and so on over the course of the last year. I think if we're fortunate, that means much more investment in biomedicine, much more thinking about how to get things through despite regulations that are holding things back, especially in the U.S., and also much more in things like transhumanism, like restoring sight, curing deafness, because if we don't want to die, well, we can actually extend our lives potentially much farther. We haven't really thrown the full kitchen sink at that. And I think those are kind of the three trends I was thinking of, right? A, the switch from the physical to the physical to the digital. B, the forced deprecation of the 20th century, and C, this Y-shaped recovery.
Got it. Okay, really fascinating, fascinating predictions for where the world is headed. Now, there are obviously a growing number of deep technology startups around the world that are using artificial intelligence, robotics, blockchain, biotech, computing, quantum computing, and other disruptive technologies. But deep tech startups do not get the same attention. Even in India, we've seen it's only an emerging trend where we are seeing deep tech startups only get some attention in recent times. As somebody who's been so closely involved with such companies and businesses, whether genetics or digital currencies, what do you think are the essential drivers that that are needed in an ecosystem to grow deep tech startups? And if there is any color you can share with respect to what needs to be done in India from the outside in to grow the deep tech startup ecosystem in India, that would be amazing to hear.
Great. So I'm going to give maybe a non-obvious answer, which is I think the answer is media, 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 media. Right? And let me explain why I say that. I wrote an essay called "The Purpose of Technology," which you can Google balajis.com, "The Purpose of Technology," and essentially I make the point that there are technologies, ocular implants that can restore sight, cochlear implants that can restore hearing to the deaf, treatments that can credibly reverse aging, things that you could actually have a secular version of reincarnation almost, where you can sequence someone's DNA and do eukaryotic chromosome synthesis to like revivify them if they had good enough karma among their friends to have them go and do it. There's a lot of these kind of truly magical technologies that are out there, but what is lacking is the media ecosystem to capture the imagination of the youth. A lot of the media that we have today is American media, and that's because of the way the U.S. is right now. This may not be obvious to folks in India, but there's at least like two different groups in the U.S. The East Coast, the kind of legacy elite, is declining as a function of the internet, because free speech and free markets, truly global free speech, truly global free markets are not a competition they're winning in. Truly global free markets mean Wall Street gets beaten by Wall Street bets, this Reddit subreddit, if you saw that recently. And truly global free speech means that, okay, the U.S. is going to have to deal with lots of people speaking that it didn't expect to speak, like in particular 400, 500 million Indians now have a voice. So because of that, a lot of the American media is very bearish on tech. It's something where just structurally the people who are creating that content have seen their fortunes wane with tech because Google and Facebook took all their ad revenue, the industry declined. They just don't think of it as a good thing because their peer group has not had a good thing. So the people who tell the stories, who write the scripts, who create the movies, that's why you get Black Mirror. Conversely, in India, you have Super 30. Now, Super 30 is just not the kind of movie that you could make in America for all kinds of reasons, right? But it is just fundamentally this amazing positive spirit because India has seen its fortunes rise with technology, right? Rise with liberalization, returning to where we should be on the world stage. And so that's something that's a completely different culture that could build a totally different media ecosystem because we're capable of arguing in English. We're capable of, doing world-class, computer science for sure, and actually also world-class content. This is related to actually, the deep tech point. I think India can become and should become a media superpower. China became a tech and manufacturing superpower. I think India becomes a tech and media superpower. We have all the talent. We have all the animators from Hollywood. The back end is happening. Obviously, there's Bollywood, but the difference is rather than Bollywood, which has an Indian flavor to it, which is great, nothing wrong with that. Think about ArcelorMittal, right? That's a global bar of steel, right? That's not Indian steel. It's not karma and dharma and yoga, which is great. It's not Indian. It's global, right? It's globally competitive, right? And in the same way, I think we can make globally competitive tech media where we lead the way on transhumanism. We lead the way on brain-machine interface and limber generation and artificial intelligence and machine translation, because we don't just develop the technologies, we glorify them, right? And now how does that work? Because all of the current storytelling is basically this Black Mirror dystopian thing, right? It's Terminator, that's what people hear about when they think about robotics. It's Gattaca, that's what people think about when they think about genetics, right? It is, you can name 1,000 sci-fi movies and all the sci-fi movies are negative. We can give a different kind of thing. People sometimes call this solar punk as opposed to cyberpunk, rather than a gritty future where things have gotten worse, but there's cool tech. Rather something where solar punk, the word connotes like the sun shining down, whether it's renewable energy, nuclear energy, it's just like a positive vision. And so the key is the flip, where the trick of all dystopian sci-fi is it starts with the implicit premise that the present is idyllic and there was some technology that was invented and the future became worse as a consequence. Oh, Terminators were invented and we went from flowers and all being happy to these awful robots around, right? But you can flip it around, and the alternative vision is a present that's actually post-apocalyptic or close to it, a present that has real problems, a present where one person or a small group has developed this technological fire that can help so many people, but they're being hemmed in and pressed in by regulators or foreign interests or what have you, and they need to actually push that through, and it's a heroic journey, the hero's journey. And this is actually more similar, as you would know, and as many of our founders would know, to the entrepreneur's journey, the hero's journey. And so that resonates, and that's also a positive story, and it just flips that fundamental premise. So that's my call to Indian storytellers, to Indian media makers. This is also part of how we assert ourselves as a number one on the world stage, is we take over the role of actually telling heroic stories, positive stories, not stories of how everything's going to be terrible, but positive stories that have a practical meaning to them. And that is how I think the attention comes, right? Because you have this story about someone regaining sight, then you have 100 deep tech companies that make that story actually true. So that's my answer there, which is maybe a non-obvious answer. And I think all the funding, everything else comes if you got the story.
It's an answer I wasn't expecting, but it did invoke images of Mad Max Fury Road in my head.
So we want the opposite of Mad Max Fury Road, right?
I got that.
Yeah, because that's the thing is like like America today is kind of closer to Mad Max Fury Road. That sounds like some future. That's unfortunately like some present, right? Like Texas is like that. It's power out for days. It's one of the most remarkable things, by the way, that I've seen in my life. Over like about 40 years old. I have seen. We're roughly contemporaries. One of the most remarkable things is that the U.S. has become more similar to the India of my youth, and India has like ascended and is more similar to the U.S. of maybe the 1950s, right? Where it is now the U.S. which has it has a bunch of smart people who just couldn't get together at a societal level. And that was like the 1940s, 50s, 60s India, right? And whereas India today has shipped UPI and it shipped Aadhaar and it shipped Arogya Setu, and the private sector shipped Reliance Jio, and there's number 3 in the number of tech unicorns, and it's managed to get COVID mostly under control and punched above its weight for and so on. And so so the Mad Max Fury Road is unfortunately America's present, and I actually think that we take that positive vision, we pipe it in from overseas. What I don't want Indians watching Netflix. I want Americans seeing hope in whatever the Indian competitor to Netflix is, because America's got enough negativity for the entire world, and we can't all be consuming that. We need a positive and alternative vision. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, I think the probably the Hollywood analogy of that would be LCM, the Matt Damon movie, where you had devices that were curing humans, where you just step into it and all diseases get cured. And I think they're definitely two extremes, Mad Max and LCM.
Well, so but what's funny is even Elysium is also dystopian, where it postulates that there was this technology that was held back by these greedy people, and they could have given it to everybody, and they just didn't, and so on. And that's actually not the way technology works, and I'll prove it. If you think about it, the smartphone went from a tool for the super rich, right? It was a big thing in Wall Street in the 80s to have a cell phone. It was this huge radio transmitter, cancer-causing device that you hold to your head, cost whatever thousands of dollars, and emitted all this, this energy, right? And then we took that and we took it from the richest of the rich, and technology's made that into something that's accessible to the poorest of the poor. And so the thing is that today, consumer scale brings costs down, and so the capitalist self-interest is aligned with bringing this to the poorest of the poor around the world. It just takes a little bit of time, but the exponentials happen faster than ever before. So that's why I would just say, actually both of those, that's why I put Super 30 in another corner. I'll give you one American movie, though, that is positive. Watch Limitless, okay? Limitless is great, where there's a pill that basically makes you smarter. And at first it seems like a typical sci-fi movie where there's downsides and so on it, but then at the end, they figure out how to engineer away the downsides. So you have the upsides without the downsides. And that's actually what an engineering mindset is about. That's actually, the smile ending, right? And I think there's just so much more we can do with that, and we can finance that. This isn't that expensive. One of the other things I meant to mention, by the way, why can India become a media superpower? Well, all celebrities nowadays are influencers, right? And influencers are becoming virtual influencers, like Lil Miquela and so on. And this is an area I'm extremely interested in. Epic just released MetaHuman, which is this thing which allows you to kind of synthesize faces and so on online. The virtual influencer is someone you can create at a keyboard. So you can create a beautiful person or beautiful people or beautiful groups of people who are all speaking, or beautiful animals or robots or whatever at your keyboard. You no longer need a Hollywood studio. You can do it from a laptop. That's accessible to a single Indian software engineer. And you no longer need, the thing is, Hollywood, all the things they're doing where they're shooting videos and movies there, they can't do those meetups anymore because of COVID. They have to wear masks, and there's all kinds of regulations. LA's regulations have kind of messed up Hollywood, so they've kind of broken that. The other thing they've done is they've forced, CNBC and MSNBC, all these guys to shoot from home, and so they're shooting in a environment that looks just like a YouTube video logger's environment. So the whole artifice and illusion of this, NBC soundstage is kind of taken away, and just like a reporter at home is just like you and me. And now you have the individual is actually more credible than the institution. So all of these things are pushing the direction of decentralizing media away from Hollywood, away from New York, and it's up for grabs. And this is a huge thing that I think India should invest in alongside crypto this decade.
Fantastic, Balaji. The organizers, NASSCOM team is telling me we're out of time.
Okay.
I had a few more things that I wanted to talk about, but I'm sure we'll get other opportunities to do that. But a big takeaway from me, outside of all the great stuff you've written and said about crypto in the lead up to this discussion, was the role that media can play in establishing India's global position, and cementing and upgrading India's global position in the world of technology and otherwise. Fascinating, really fascinating perspective. Thanks, Balaji. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thanks for sharing your perspective.
Thank you, Kunal. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kunal and Balaji, and I hope this session has motivated all of us to push the envelope beyond the ordinary. Startups, deep tech innovation, investments, new rules of engagement and competition, and anecdotal evidences to back them all up. So, yesterday we heard from the Prime Minister and other leaders on the need for India to become a product nation and thereby become a provider to the world. The previous session spoke about the relevance and the context of it in context of startups.